The city was unusually still that night. The soft hum of distant traffic was the only thing breaking the silence, but even that felt distant, as if the world itself had frozen in time. In an alleyway tucked behind an abandoned building, a woman lay motionless. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the cracked asphalt, her breath shallow and ragged. She was alive, barely, but no one had seen her fall. No one had heard the scuffle. The only witness? The dark, unfeeling sky. Her name was Elisa, and she couldn't remember how she'd ended up here. Every breath felt like it might be her last. The fear gnawed at her. It wasn't just the pain. It was the realization that she had been played, moved like a pawn in someone else's game. And now, she was left to pick up the pieces. Her head throbbed as a dizzying wave of memories rushed through her, each one more confusing than the last. A phone call. A promise of information that could change everything. Then the sound of footsteps. No warning, no chance to run. The man who had done this to her was still out there. Who did this to me? Elisa muttered under her breath, her voice barely above a whisper. She dragged herself to her knees, her fingers brushing against the cold concrete as she tried to steady herself. Every movement felt like it took a piece of her soul with it. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Her mind raced with fragments of the evening's events, and something was wrong. Something didn't add up. There was no time to waste. She pushed herself up, stumbling into the street. She knew she had to get out of here before whoever did this came back to finish the job. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the silence. Elisa froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the number before she even looked at it. It was him. The phone call that had led her here was still fresh in her mind. An anonymous tip. A voice in the dark telling her that the information she sought was hidden in plain sight. That a dangerous criminal was close to being exposed, and if she wanted to be the one to expose them, she had to act fast. No details, just a location and a promise of answers. But it had been a trap. Her hands trembled as she answered the phone. "Elisa," the voice on the other end said, smooth and calculated. It sent a shiver down her spine. "You didn't think you could trust me, did you? Who are you?" Elisa's voice was low, dangerous. She needed to keep her head. "What do you want?" There was a pause, the silence stretching long enough to make Elisa feel her heartbeat in her ears. Then came the laughter, quiet at first, then building, until it filled her ears like an echo in a tomb. "You'll find out soon enough," the voice said, and the call ended abruptly. Elisa cursed under her breath, tossing the phone into her pocket. Whoever this was, they knew exactly what they were doing. She needed to figure out who they were, and fast. The city streets were eerily empty as Elisa walked, her every step echoing in the hollow air. She could still feel the pulse of fear, the gnawing sensation that something was wrong. Something deeper than just the attack on her. She had been tangled in a web she didn't understand, and now the threads were unraveling faster than she could follow. It didn't take long before she noticed the figure in the distance. A man, leaning against a streetlight, his silhouette barely visible in the shadows. Elisa's pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. She was beyond fear. She had to be. This was a man who held the answers she needed. As she approached, he straightened, and Elisa recognized him immediately. John McAllister. The name was synonymous with danger. A former detective turned rogue, McAllister was known for his ruthless tactics, his ability to dig up secrets that should have stayed buried. Elisa had crossed paths with him before, but that was years ago. She thought he had disappeared, left the game. Apparently, she had been wrong. "I didn't think you'd show up," McAllister said, his voice cold and detached. "But I knew you wouldn't be able to resist." Elisa didn't respond. Her eyes scanned the surroundings. alert for any sign of movement. McAllister was unpredictable, dangerous, and not someone to be trusted. Still, she needed him, for now. "What's going on, McAllister?" she asked, her tone sharp, demanding. Took a slow step toward her, his eyes glinting with something unreadable. "You've been chasing ghosts, Elisa. The person who set you up. They've been pulling strings for years, and you've been their unwitting pawn." Her heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" "You'll find out soon enough," McAllister said with a faint smile. "But first you need to understand something. You're in deeper than you think. The people you've been trying to expose, they're everywhere, watching, and they won't stop until you're gone." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach, but Elisa didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. She was too close now, too close to the truth. "I don't have time for your cryptic bullshit," Elisa snapped, her patience wearing thin. "Tell me what's going on." McAllister took a step back, his eyes never leaving hers. "You want answers? Fine, but they won't come cheap. And trust me, price you'll pay will be more than you can imagine." Before Elisa could respond, a noise came from behind them. A footstep, followed by the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. Elisa's body tensed, but McAllister was already moving, drawing his weapon in one swift motion. "Get down!" he shouted, shoving her to the ground as gunfire rang out. Elisa's heart raced as she hit the pavement, the world spinning around her. The shots were coming from all directions now, but McAllister was already firing back. She didn't have time to process what was happening. She just reacted, rolling to the side and pulling out her own weapon. She wasn't about to die here. Not after everything. The gunfire slowed, then stopped. Elisa raised her head cautiously, her eyes scanning the area. McAllister was standing, his back against a wall, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. Blood stained his jacket, but he didn't seem to care. "They're gone," McAllister said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "For now." Elisa stood, wiping the dirt from her hands. "Who the hell are they?" McAllister didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to her. The name written on it was all she needed to see. David Harris. The name meant nothing to Elisa at first, but McAllister's grim expression said everything. This was the man behind it all, the man who had orchestrated the attack, the man who had been pulling the strings from the shadows. But there was something else, something Elisa hadn't expected. The name wasn't just a name, it was a weapon. "David Harris isn't who you think he is," McAllister said, his eyes hard. "He's been hiding in plain sight, and if we don't stop him, everything you've worked for will be destroyed." A sick feeling twisted in Elisa's gut. She had been chasing shadows for so long, but now she was face to face with the truth, and it was uglier than she could have ever imagined. As McAllister's words echoed in her mind, the pieces began to fall into place. She had been part of a game that was far bigger than she could have ever realized, and now, with every step she took, the stakes were higher than ever. The clock was ticking, and the silent crime she had been trying to uncover was about to explode into a full-blown war. Elisa had no choice but to play her part, because if she didn't, everything would crumble, and she might not survive to see the end.